Hey there, what's up? This is the third video of my playlist about the Agile Manifesto, and in this video I want to talk about working products over comprehensive documentation. I basically want to tell you why exactly this value exists, what it does try to achieve, and I want to give you 5 tips how you can apply this at least a little bit better in your environment. And if you stay till the very end, I will give you my kind of secret idea on how I assure that I actually follow this value every single day. So if you're interested, stay here. If you're new to this channel, I'm Daniel and I'm talking about all things Agile, but I'm focused a little bit more on the Agile mindset and the Agile culture. So if you are interested in developing an Agile mindset, subscribe. Now, why does this value exist? Working products or working services over comprehensive documentation. In that case, let's start with talking about documentation. What does documentation do? It basically provides and preserves knowledge that was acquired once and tries to make it available later on for others to use. Basically, it's lessons learned so that you don't do the same mistake at least twice. But there are a couple of disadvantages when it comes to documentation. First of all, it's not that easy to identify right away if some knowledge that was acquired is going to be reviewed later on. Because not everything that we do, not every lesson that we learn is actually worth preserving. Because it takes effort to do so, right? You need to actually document what you do and you need to make it available for later or for others so that they can use that. On the other hand, even useful documentation quite often is never again reviewed. Why? Well, personally, I'm not familiar with any tool, any documentation tool that allows an easy access to information later on. Because this requires quite a tremendous amount of discipline from the employees or the members of the organization to actually, make it in a way that it was agreed upon in the entire organization so that everyone has an idea where to find what. And that is, how shall I say that? That's a huge disadvantage. And I want to invite you to check it yourself. Collect some data or make some analysis on that. How much effort do you spend to do documentation about something versus how much effort would it be to re-engineer what was acquired once? What I mean by that is, quite often let's assume we're talking about software, but it can be hardware too or anything else. Something was developed and the documentation for that is missing, so it's not there. Later on, you need to revisit that part of the software. In that case, if there's no documentation, you need to relearn what exactly the software or this part of the software does, right? So measure that. How much effort is it to document everything? And how much effort is it to re-engineer the parts that you actually have to revisit? Because it's not a majority of the code that you do that you have to revisit later on, or that are not obvious, basically, that take some effort to re-engineer. Do this for yourself and do this in your own environment. And make the math. Is it worth documenting everything? Or is it worth only documenting what you're fairly or absolutely certain that you have to revisit that later on for whatever reason? The Agile community basically has this guideline that they use for documentation, and it's super simple. It's really super simple. Document as much as needed, but as less as possible. How much is needed? And what's as less as possible? Basically, who can answer those questions is very simple as well. It's hard to execute though. It's the members of your organization, right? The ones who do the documents and who need to review the documents later, those are the parties that actually have to define how much is needed and how less is possible. So I encourage you to actually go into a conversation within the members of your organization to identify exactly that And maybe there's some huge time savings into that. And last, on documentation, I wanna, it's not a popular aspect, but I've identified that quite often documentation is used as an excuse. It's basically, if you have worked on something and it was a tremendous amount of effort, and it's Thursday evening, you don't really want to start something new this week, and you're maybe not motivated, or the result of the previous item wasn't exactly, like, your mindset isn't really upbeat right now. So what can you do now? You can either start something new with a mindset that is not ideal, or, oh, wait, there is quite some documentation that I still need to do, so let me take a day or two and I will do that. And usually in the environment or in your team that you're in, when this argument comes up, hey, I still need to do documentation, everyone, without questioning it, says, oh yeah, documentation, that's good, do that, let's do it. But it's not always useful to do, at least not to the extent it's done. The second aspect of working product over comprehensive documentation is bureaucracy, and specifically politics. Why is that? So what exactly does your environment do to assure collaboration or coordination between departments or teams? In most organizations, you have a hierarchical structure, and this hierarchical structure, or middle management, is supposed to actually assure this collaboration or coordination between those departments or teams. But is that really the best way to do it? Personally, I think not. Why? Because personal interests come into play when it comes to coordination assigned to middle management. Middle management traditionally comes from the fact that you compete with others, right? Only the best ones get promoted and are middle management then. But that means that they actually have to compete with their teams, and the focus, the emphasis is never on collaboration. It is always on individual accolades. It's to shine oneself, right? I am the best here, that's why I should get that position. And then you are in the position and you should change your mindset entirely right away and say, no, from now on I'm not trying to be better than the other middle management to go to executives or senior management. No, it's now I want to collaborate. Now I want to assure that everything works out fine, and it doesn't matter if I get the credit for that or someone else, as long as the product at the end benefits from it. Keep in mind, working product over comprehensive documentation. Now, when it comes to a decision that has to be made, and on one hand you have a solution that is actually to the best benefit of the product that you develop, and on the other hand it's to the best for the individual manager that is assigned to that. And this manager has to do this decision. It's really tempting, right, to make a decision in a way that it benefits you the most, rather than that it benefits the product. And, keep in mind that most decisions are not black and white. Both of them have aspects for both parties, but which one will be decided? And who's judging if that was a good decision or not? Basically, who's judging if middle management does a great job or not? In most environments, it's not the members that they're supposed to servantly lead. No, in most environments, it is the superior of the middle manager who decides if this was a great job or not. And those parties usually don't really dig deep into what could have happened and what happened. Basically, no, they just see the end result, and that's what they decide upon. But one thing you should definitely keep in mind: this is not done out of bad intention. It's not done to harm anyone or anything. No, it's a problem by culture, because we grew up in an environment that actually supports personal accolades. Think about sports teams, any kind of sport basically. They are competing, and the best ones are celebrated. Within a sports team, they all celebrate they are one party, so they celebrate together. But nonetheless, usually there's this one best player in a team, and these players get the most attention. They get the biggest contracts. So there is a huge emphasis, even within one team, to actually be the best and to compete within. And I don't know which sport you follow, but I'm pretty sure you have seen your team or other teams in your sport that actually, disintegrated sort of because there was some competition within the team and two star members maybe didn't really get along, and what was supposed to be this awesome decade of success turned out to be, just much less than that. And that all comes down to politics. And if we focus a little bit more on politics and through that bureaucracy, then we fail to actually focus on what really matters. And that is the working product. By the way, I've done a video on bureaucracy. There will be a card somewhere up there. And I did another one from this playlist about individuals and interactions that actually show what individuals need to be as high performant as possible. Check both out if you like. And that leads us to our third aspect for today, and that is waste. Basically, decisions that are made for the benefit of personal interest rather than the product that this organization is supposed to do, this is waste. You don't do it for the best of the organization. You do it for the best of one individual within that organization. And that's usually not for the benefit of the entire organization as a whole, but, feel free to prove me wrong, put it down in the comments. I'm happy to listen to stories that actually prove me wrong, because that's the way how I can grow. The other aspect on waste is the documentation. I mentioned that earlier already. When you create a documentation and then it is lost in a nexus of a wiki or anything like that, yeah, that's a lot of waste. I mean, why do people do the documentation? Not for the sake of not working on the product? No, there should be some benefit down the road, and quite often this benefit is never achieved. So if you can actually reduce the amount of work not necessary, then you can maximize or increase the amount of work that benefits. So waste is really important, and try to keep the waste as minimal as possible, and try to focus as much as possible on the actual work that you need to do. I mean, think about the purpose of your organization. Why does it exist? What does it try to achieve? I've rarely seen someone saying like, hey, we work so that we have the most comprehensive documentation out there in the world. Unless that's something that you want to sell. But do you? Do you want to sell information? Is this your business model? Or do you actually want to produce something, or like a product or a service that you can sell to customers? And the documentation is just a vehicle to actually assure a better quality product. I mean, I've read quite a few mission statements and vision statements and all sorts of statements that companies put out there in order to explain what they do. And usually it's always we are, we do, we want, it's we. It's not some of us, or one of us, or this one best. No, it's usually phrased in a way that makes a community out of it. And that's great. It is really, really great. But quite often it's actually not followed through within the organization, because then there is the competition part going on. And that's not helpful. It goes specifically sour when you actually base promotions or salary improvements on personal accolades. I always promote to, when you want to promote someone, or when you want to increase the salary or adjust it, focus always, at least the majority of your focus should be on how did that person improve the environment? How did that person help others? How did this person enable others to actually provide something valuable to the organization? So if you focus more on the collaborative aspect of their work when you want to decide upon any adjustments, then you emphasize that. You set the right incentives to focus on what exactly benefits the organization most. But if you say, hey, you are the fastest coder, or you are the coder with the cleanest code, or anything like that, then you always will harm collaboration, because your incentives are set for individual goals. Now, why does the second value of the Agile Manifesto exist? Working software, working product over comprehensive documentation. By the way, I'm saying product here all the time. The first video of this playlist explains why I don't say software but product. Feel free to check it out. Okay, where were I? Yeah, okay. Why does this value exist? It's three things, I believe. The first one is, it is supposed to help you focus. Focus on what really matters. Focus on what provides value to the customer and therefore is to the benefit of the organization. Second, reduce the amount of waste. Right? Maximize the amount of work not necessary. Actually, maximize avoiding the... I hope you got that. And the third one is, it is supposed to support a collaborative culture. A culture where all the individuals within that organization are incentivized to work together for the greater good rather than to work for the benefit of oneself. I know that's a tricky one, but it can work. I can assure you it does work, and there are plenty of examples how. If you need some more support or guidance on that, please comment on this and I will get back to you. And now the 5 tips. I promised you 5 plus my personal one, but let's start with the 5. The first one is something that we call the 80-20 rule. And it's supposed to describe that 80% of the end result, of the benefit, of the value, can be created with only 20% of the effort. And if you want to achieve the remaining 20% of the results, you need to put in 80% of the effort. So we live in a world that is fast-paced, and most of us acknowledge that perfection is not possible. Try to find the sweet spot where you say, this is good enough. This is what we wanted to have. It's not perfect by any means, but perfection is anyway not possible, so let's not even try that. But go to a place or to a degree where you say, this is fair enough. It works, it's good, we can use that. And stop there. Don't go further. That applies to documentation as well as the product itself, but specifically for documentation. I always encourage my teams to rather be a point of contact. So put down what you want to document in a more bullet point structure or very short sentences. Don't try to explain every little detail of it, and then provide the information where you can get more information. Who did this part of the code? What was the idea behind that, or the principles more or less? This reduces already the amount of time you have to spend on creating those documentation. As I said earlier, who decides or who defines what is enough, right? How much documentation do we need? It is the environment itself. So when you have a conflict in your environment, quite often I personally have experienced it this way, when the entity that creates the documentation, the member or the members who create the documentation, they say this is fair enough, this works, and then there's someone else, another department or so, that say, nah, that's not enough, I want it more detailed, I need more information to that. This conflict is quite often because, the one side has the intention to spend as little time as possible on that, and the other side doesn't need to spend anything. They can always say, hey, make it more, right? It actually quite often is even an awesome excuse if you haven't really read the documentation, or if you don't know what to do with it, or if you just want to push this topic aside for a bit because you have something really important to do. It's not enough, please work further on that, and I'll check that later. But there is a solution to that. And if you want to apply the solution, it should be applied throughout your organization, otherwise it might create some more tensions than necessary. But the solution is, the one who needs the documentation is supposed to create the documentation. That sounds, a little bit like a punishment, maybe even, but it's not meant like that. There are two sides of that. First of all, if the entity who needs the documentation needs to write the documentation, then this person will be more likely to accept a more minimal documentation, because it is on their disadvantage to create the most comprehensive one. But there is a huge benefit behind that, and that is usually that entity who creates the documentation, who needs it later on, is not familiar with what needs to be documented. Right? So that person cannot create the documentation right from the get-go. There needs to be some conversations with the entity that created that product or that part of the product, service or whatever, that needs to be documented. So those two parties actually have to communicate. And while doing so, the understanding about that can be further increased from both parties. Because usually the entity or the member of the organization who want to use something later on, they can really explain what exactly they wanted or what exactly they need, and then the development side of this equation can actually maybe improve upon the actual product that was created. So the information is spread furthermore, and the understanding of that is spread furthermore, and it emphasizes collaboration because both need to work together to achieve that. Yes, it is more time in first place, but there are so many benefits behind that from collaboration and understanding perspectives that it is really worth giving it a shot if you have that conflict about how much documentation is really necessary. I would even advise doing that regardless, but yeah, maybe it's an overkill. If you have a small startup of 50 people or less, it's usually emphasize collaboration and communication within is more useful than creating a kind of a process on how to do that documentation. Right? Keep in mind, process is second place to interactions and individuals to them. Right? And the third advice I can give you is be very careful with your incentives. Your incentives should always be regarding collaboration. It should always be what makes us better collaboratively, rather than any personal accolades. If you set personal accolades, expect competition. And this is the fourth one. Same standards for everyone in the company. It goes to the aspect leading by example. So when you have these incentives on the team level to collaborate, then please have the same incentives on all hierarchical level in your organization, so that basically everyone can learn from one another how to better collaborate. If there's a switch between collaboration and then one level above there's like competition, I mean, this is an inconsistency that people either consciously or even subconsciously feel. They will acknowledge that, and if they want to become or grow within the organization and go through the hierarchical structure, then yeah, they will act accordingly, and you should be very careful about that. So put the same standards everywhere, right? Treat everyone equally when it comes to those standards and the incentives. And the fifth one is survey. Right? Ask your organization, ask the members, are we on the right track when it comes to this value? Do we do it? Do we collaborate? Is it always about the value for the customer that we do our decisions and basically shape our organization and our frameworks accordingly to that? Or do we rather focus on incentivize something else? I mean, you from a manager perspective, if you are in that fortunate position, then you can make your decisions and you can try to emphasize on how it might be perceived, but there's nothing that can actually be as good as just ask. So ask the members, are they happy? Is this how they want to work? Do they actually follow this value if you want to be in an agile environment? It's kind of a given, right? Now to recap that a little bit, my 5 tips is the 80-20 rule, and the one who needs the documentation creates the documentation, setting the right incentives for everyone in the organization, same standard, and last, ask your members whether they are happy with how it is set up right now or how to improve that. And now there's the very last one. This is kind of what I do. I try to do every day. Not perfect either. So what do I do to actually try to assure that this happens? And there are one of 2 questions that I ask myself. I actually ask myself both questions every day. First of all is, what have I accomplished today that provides value to the customers? And the second question is, did someone approached me today and thanked me for supporting that person to provide value to the customers. Not everyone can provide value to the customers directly. You might be in a supportive department like HR or Office IT, or you might be in middle management that doesn't directly create the value for the customers. But then your aim, your goal should be that every day someone approaches you and said, thank you. You helped me provide more value to the customer. So, have I provided value today? Did someone thank me today for supporting them to provide value today? Kind of simple, but it actually incentivizes it. It puts you in the right frame, in the right mindset to actually do what's best for the organization. And there's this set of cards that I've received once called, I think, thank you cards. You can give them out in your organization so that everyone can very easily write down 1 or 2 lines and just give it on the desk of someone, so you don't really have to meet that other person in order to thank that person. You can as well make that digital if you like, however you like, but it's a really, really cool tool to do that and to actually promote that, because then collaborating and supporting becomes the goal. You get accolades for doing that rather than anything else. And imagine you have a desk and you have, I don't know, a whiteboard somewhere in your office, and there would be dozens of thank you cards up there. Isn't that great? Wouldn't that be awesome? Feels super, and it actually incentivizes collaboration within your organization quite strongly. So yeah, go ahead and try it. Now we are pretty much at the end. But I want to ask you one thing. What is it that you have done today to provide value to the customers? Or did someone thank you for supporting them doing so? And if you have an answer to that, please put it in the comments. I'm really curious to read that. And otherwise, if you like that video, then please hit the like button. It just takes 2 seconds to do so. And if you really like that video, or if you want to see more of those videos, please subscribe. And if you want to be informed about all new videos coming up, then hit the bell icon, so that the system of YouTube will help you to the further greatness or something like that. I don't know. We're pretty much done for today. As I said, like, subscribe, push the bell, comment if you like, and have an awesome time.